All right.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. February 6th, 2023 N3C Community Forum. And so as always, the presentation will be recorded. Use the Q&A button or the chat to post questions. Next slide. So February 13th, we're going to hear about the current progress of privacy preserving record linkage updates, the linkage of different data sources, and that's moved along hugely since it was proposed a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago now, Jasmine and Sean. Then the 20th is off, President's Day. February 27th, increased stroke severity and mortality in patients with SARS-CoV-2 infection analysis from N3C. And then on March 6th, Brad Malin is going to talk about de-identification methods, ethical AI data distribution, and real-world data. Okay, next slide, please. So we are up to 7 million COVID positive cases, 17.8 million people, 22 billion rows, and so forth. So it's continuing to grow. Next slide, please. And so today we're going to have publications committee updates, obviously a critical part of the effort, and I'm actually interested and eager to see how things have progressed. That's really been one of the truly innovative, many innovative parts of N3C is the whole management of intellectual property and publications across such a large and diverse community. So who's going to be starting?
I will be starting.
Okay. Okay, Christine, hit it.
Christine, I'm going to share my screen. Just
Okay,
one
thank
second.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. So today we are going to give you a little bit of an overview of the work that the publication committee has done. Can I have the next slide, please? First, we want to remind you of some of the existing policies and some updates on the policy regarding publication and presentation. We'll clarify the key roles and responsibility of the publication committee. We'll give you an overview of the process that the committee is taking in reviewing material. We'll have some time to show you some examples, so you know some use cases related to our reviews. And then we'll inform you of some change coming soon. So at the end of the meeting, you should be really comfortable in understanding what are the do's and don'ts of sharing knowledge and publishing anything about the use of N3C content. So N3C is more than a data enclave. As you know, it's really a community that is dedicated to the collaborating and the generation and dissemination of knowledge to help combat COVID-19. The N3C attribution and publication principle are really meant to clarify what are the norms and expectations for disseminating knowledge, based on the use of N3C content. Those principles highlight how to respect the privacy for data subject, to respect the N3C code of conduct and the N3C and the community principle, and then to comply with the NCAT's data transfer and data use agreement. So those principles apply to every publication, including different pre-publication that you would have. It applies to abstract, community presentation, podium presentation, poster, or any kind of material that you are presenting to an outside audience. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So the N3C Publication Committee was really organized to facilitate compliance with all of those N3C requirements, with a focus on really facilitating the attribution that will be fair and inclusive, troubleshoot authorship question regarding N3C publication, and track the output of the N3C community. The community, the publication committee is not meant to do some peer review of the material, but really to help the author apply, N3C best practices. It's a group of volunteers who meets weekly. Can I have the next slide? And then here you see the composition of this committee. You see that there is 2 co-chairs to this committee, and there is a very diverse membership in background and in expertise. There are some vacant seats that are available. So if you are interested in joining this committee, please reach out to any one of us. And we like to keep some of those seats available for author that needs to have refresher on how to abide by the attribution and publication principle. And we offer them a month-long little internship with us. Can I have the next slide? So here is a kind of a overview of the project lifecycle. Authors are really encouraged to work with the domain teams who are very familiar with N3C. And once the author assemble their team, do their research, they submit their data use request to the data access committee who oversees those requests. The data can be analyzed in the enclave. And when the author decide that they want to share their output, they need to go in front of the data download committee who oversees the appropriateness of any kind of download of any kind of data or any kind of information that will be shared with the in any publication will have to go in front of the download committee. The manuscript is then drafted and is presented to the publication committee to verify that the publication is consistent with the data use request, that all of the data being presented is preserving the privacy of the data subject. The committee also verified the attribution of of everybody who has been party to the work that is being presented, and verify how N3C is being presented. Can I see the next slide? So here are the kind of core responsibility of the committee. It's really to ensure that the value of N3C, the principle and the policies are respected, to protect the data partner and the individual patient by ensuring that the data being presented, as I say, is consistent with the data use that was approved by the data access committee, and that the material being presented protect the identity of those individual, the data partner and marginalized group. The committee also look at ensuring that individual and consortial contributors are fairly and appropriately recognized, that the N3C collaborative is represented accurately, and serve as a resource for the author in general through the whole process. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Caroline, I think, who is going to give you some more detail on how the committee operates and review material.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I'll walk through slides with examples of these 4 critical responsibilities, core responsibilities. Next slide. And I'll say just quickly, the N3C database was a very new and novel undertaking in data science, and likewise, the publications committee for a project like this was new as well. So we always welcome feedback from N3C users as far as what's working well, what's hard from a publications standpoint. So one of our main core roles is to be stewards of our data partners and individual patient contributors to the database. So we need to make sure that the final data that's going to be shown to the world is consistent with the approved use and protects the identities of individuals and data partners and marginalized groups. So we as a committee go through a checklist that includes whether or not the data that's being submitted to publish or to present at a conference fits within the scope of the data use agreement that those authors are citing. So sometimes there are more than one data use request that would be applicable to a given project, or sometimes authors listed might not be on the DUR, and then we just ask for clarifications from the authors. We check to make sure that all cell sizes submitted are greater than 20. So the cells within each table or graph are greater than 20 because less than 20 could be identifiable. And in some situations, less than 10 is considered obscured enough, but that would be an exception that needs extra approval. And later on in the presentation, we'll go through examples of what it means to obscure numbers that are less than 20. And then if publications specifically reference native use native populations, it has to be done in a way that acknowledges the NIH Tribal Council's role in the representation of the data. And then we also make sure the work doesn't somehow identify specific data partners, like obliquely saying, oh, this is from University of Michigan, or we use one data partner, located in a state that might only have one contributing institution, for example. So next slide. So next we want to serve to protect and help individual and consortial authors and contributors. So a lot of work went into the building of the database and knowledge artifacts that are used daily by anyone using this data. And the guiding principle of the people who created N3C is that there would be inclusive attribution for all of this work, developing code sets and data artifacts that we all rely on. An individual author who's hasn't been with the N3C from the beginning wouldn't necessarily know about all the work that went into building those data artifacts. And so that's one of the roles of the publications committee, is to let the authors know about the different attribution levels and policies so that everyone who contributed to the work that they are submitting is appropriately acknowledged. And we'll go over that on the next slide now. So the approach to attribution is to be inclusive, like I mentioned. And so there are 3 tiers of authorship, and this is sort of hard and complicated, so it's understandable if authors have questions about this. The first tier is your masthead authorship, typical authorship that you would use in any paper, whether it's a small database or a large database. So that's at the discretion of the senior author and the corresponding author. Then the second tier are individuals who substantially contributed to the knowledge artifacts or data code sets that were used to run the analysis that is being submitted. And again, the author who is writing the paper and even doing the analyses might not know of all the work that went into creating those codes. And that's where the publication committee comes in and lets the author know that consortial authorship should be offered to people in these core blocks that contributed to their paper. So what happens is the author submits their paper for publication. We review and see the domain teams or the consortial authors that contributed to data artifacts that were used in the analysis. And then the publications committee emails out to those groups and offers them tier 2 consortial authorship on that paper. The consortial authors then do have the responsibility of reviewing the manuscript and being willing to be acknowledged and fill out a contributors form. And then they would be a consortial author. And that means they are indexed in Medline, but their name is not listed on the masthead. And then the third tier of authorship is acknowledgement. So inclusive acknowledgement of everyone who contributed to the data artifacts that went into making that paper. And similarly, the publications committee would email out to the core authorship blocks. People in those core authorship blocks could opt out of being acknowledged. And then the publications committee provides authors a list of copy pastable text of who should be in the acknowledgements and what funding should be in the acknowledgements. I think that's all on this slide. It's kind of busy. All right, and then in that copy and pastable text that the publications committee will provide to the authors, it's also available on some of the N3C websites. All the funding is acknowledged. There's a statement about each individual paper not being from NCATS or the N3C. And then there's information about citing an IDEA award for authors who live in these states. Next slide. And then this is a new step in the funding and acknowledgement process for publications, is to also submit an intent to publish form with the Recover funding program. So if a work was supported by Recover funding, there's an additional link for the authors to go through, and then it lists important information to list in the manuscript about Recover and Recover funding. And we, as a N3C publications committee, we also review to make sure that authors have done that step as well. And next slide. So our third sort of core responsibility is to protect the N3C collaborative, assure all the information in a submitted paper is accurate. So we read the methods to make sure that the description of the N3C is correct, and that there's nothing falsely stated about it. And then specifically, if a paper is about the N3C itself, we'd read the whole manuscript very carefully. And then again, we make sure the funding is acknowledged correctly. Next slide. And then lastly, we serve as where we want to be a resource for every author in the N3C community. So if there's potential overlap with other manuscripts, there's no issue with that. Part of the scientific process in a growing body of evidence is that research questions are done and duplicated by other people and with slightly different approaches. So we leave that to peer review to decide if two similar works should be published in a peer review publication. But if we see a lot of overlap, we might let the authors know that this other work is going on, just to foster collaboration if they're interested. That's of course hard to do at our stage in the game when a paper is already being written or is already written and we're reviewing the near final product. And so to avoid unnecessary duplication, we do encourage all authors to work within domain teams if possible, because then the sort of collaboration and duplication can be worked out upstream of the final manuscript. And then if there are sort of disparate findings of things that are core to the N3C, then we might jump in and do a deeper dive with authors who had very different findings. And then I think that's it. I'll hand it over to Swaroop to take over.
Thank you, Carolyn. So what I'll do is I'll go through a few details of the nuts and bolts of how authors engage with the publication committee and what the publication committee does once they're notified of a scientific product. The policies that guide the functioning of the publication committee, they apply to all analyses, reports, data, conference abstracts, presentations, and podium talks and posters. So when the authors have a manuscript draft, it could be either targeting to a journal, a report, or a preprint archive, a repository, or it may be targeted towards a podium presentation or a poster, and these are abstracts and the final presentations of posters. If they are about N3C or they include any N3C data, and with the authors complete a publication intent form before they submit their scientific product to the venue, in the form, the authors confirm that their research in the scientific product they're reporting, it is in concordance with the data use request. And then they also confirm that they've adhered to the downloads policy. They've gotten approval from the downloads committee. They verify that they've considered the proper attribution according to the policies, and that they've used the appropriate acknowledgments, and they have considered overlaps with other teams. When the committee receives the scientific product, it goes through, again, it verifies concordance with the data use request. We check for approval of the data downloads. We review the cell sizes in the figures, tables, text, abstract, verify for any places where the counts of the numbers could be less than 20, or they could be back calculated to less than 20. We verify adherence to the attributions and publication principles, and we facilitate attribution, like Carolyn mentioned, for manuscripts, and we promote and track the published manuscripts and the other scientific products that come out of N3C. Next slide, please. So here we'll work with 3 examples that show specifically how the publication committee works with the scientific products. This is a fictional example of a violation of the N3C results download policy. The scenario is that researchers want to present results that I'll show in the next slide at a conference. And what the publication committee does is to verify that no table or figure or text may report cells that have, or information that has, that's about fewer than 20%, unless the value is 0. And as a resource, the N3C results download policy is a resource for the authors. It explains that there is an appeal process to reduce the reportable cell size threshold to 10 based on the specific scientific case. And that's a case-by-case appeal process. And if the appeal process is granted, the policy also explains how to identify the specific values. So on the next slide, we'll see an example of violation of the results download policy. Next slide, please. This is a busy slide, so I will walk you through this one. There are 3 panels. The leftmost panel is the original data, which is unmasked, and what that means is no effort was made to address the cell counts less than 20. In the middle panel, we are seeing what we are calling insufficient masking. And I'll walk you through 1 or 2 examples to show that if we have sufficient information to calculate the actual cell count where it is less than 20. And in the panel on the right, we are showing examples of what we're calling sufficient masking. There are many ways in which masking of the cells with counts less than 20 can be considered sufficient. And we are not showing all of the possible ways. And we have some suggestions. The publication committee has some suggestions, and it's in the attributions and publications principles. And we are open to engage with the authors on specific ways in which masking can be done. So if we look at an example, let us take the panel on the left, we are looking at the row that talks about gender. And then there are 3 rows for gender: female, male, and others. And there are 3 columns. One which is all patients, and the total number of patients is 5,000. Of those 5,000 patients, 1,500 were patients with prior documented SARS-CoV infection, and 3,500 is the last column where patients are without prior documented COVID-19 infection. What we see in the row for the others in the gender is there are 3 cells, 8, 2, and 6, that are less than 20. Now, if we go to the middle panel, the way they were obscured is by saying, changing the 8, 2, and 6 to less than 20. The issue, or it's insufficient masking, because we take the total of 5,000 in all patients. And if we look at the middle panel, the sum of the female and the male patients is 4,992. And that means that we can calculate the others in that column to be 8. So we are able to back calculate the number that is less than 20. There is another, the other examples. So what is one way to sufficiently mask these cell counts is in the last panel on the right, the others are still less than 20, which is the same as in the middle panel. But what we also do is we change the number in the male or the female row to, we skew the number by at least up to 5 to obscure the precise count in the other gender category. And it's what we other authors address that in many different ways. And one way is what is shown here, which is a table legend, which explains that to comply with N3C policy, this skewing was done. There are other examples in this table. For example, if we look at the race ethnicity category row, there are 7 categories, 7 rows within that, 7 categories, and the AI, the American Indian and Alaska Native category, there are 14, 6, and 8 in the left panel. All are cell counts less than 20. And in the middle panel, there are the column that says patients with prior infection. There are 2 rows with less than 20. So when there are 2 rows that are less than 20 and both of them are obscured, it is harder to back calculate the exact counts in both the rows. So that's why the rows in the middle panel are green for the column with patients less than with prior infection. But the columns for all patients and the patients without prior infection are still, they can be back calculated. And the way the panel on the right shows a different way of obscuring them, which is we chose a different one other category. It could be any other category, and say less than 85 or less than 75. That way we make at least 2 of the categories are obscured and make it harder to back calculate the actual numbers. In the medical comorbidity section, in the panel on the left, we see there are 6, 5, and 6, and also there's a cell with 0. And the cell with 0 is okay. There's nobody to identify there. And in the middle panel, we see that the count that is less than 20 in the first column is not okay because we can back calculate it. And again, we use the same approach that says we choose another category and we obscure it. So this is a very these are some examples. This is not an exhaustive list of ways in which cell counts less than 20 can be obscured. but these are some examples. We go through this exercise for all the figures, all the tables, including any tables and figures in any supplementary material. And we also go through the text where there is also any numbers are reported which either report explicitly counts less than 20 or allow the counts to be back calculated. Next slide, please. This is another example. This is another illustration of how the publication committee works with the scientific products that it reviews. And this scenario is about authorship. The scenario is authors use artifacts in the enclave, for example, concept sets, code, workbooks. There are many artifacts in the enclave that as a community, it's a collective of expertise and products that were developed. And many times people find that reinventing the wheel is inefficient when somebody has already put something together. And some of the enclave artifacts are available in many different ways on the enclave. But the authors are uncertain how to attribute commensurate credit to the people who developed the artifacts. That's where the publication committee plays a role in facilitating communication between the authors and the community to identify the relevant contributors and recruit them to be listed under consortial authorship. So the authors, again, the one way the authors can actually minimize their workload is to start working with the domain team at the get-go, engage with the domain team. There are 26 domain teams, and that are the 26 clinical domain teams, and 6 domain teams that are that cut across domains, which are, for example, the machine learning and other methods kinds of domains teams that cut across the clinical domains. A good thing would be for the authors would be to engage with the domain team as early as possible in their project workflow. And also use the processes that are set in place by the publication committee. Next slide, please. This is a very interesting and exciting development that's in the pipeline, where the Palantir developers who developed the N3C enclave are working on software that would make it easy to trace all the artifacts and all the products that are used in each project, and make it kind of as much automatic as possible, transitive attribution of people who contributed to the artifacts. So this process is, we're expecting that it will be more efficient and easier. Next slide, please. Now switching to another illustration of how the committee engages with the authors and the scientific products it reviews. This scenario is about adherence to the N3C code of conduct. And the scenario is where investigators, with a data use request on determinants of renal dysfunction. This is a fictional example. The DUR is on the determinants of renal dysfunction in patients with COVID. They wish to publish novel statistical methods for feature selection to predict long COVID. So there are two things that are important in this scenario. One is the focus of the paper or the scientific product, it could be conference abstract, anything. It's on novel statistical methods and not necessarily answering a clinical question. The focus is on the statistical methods. And the second second feature in this scenario is that the data use request is on renal dysfunction, but the scientific product is on predicting long COVID. So there is no concordance between the clinical problems that is being addressed in the paper and the data use request. So the guiding principle for the committee's review is N3C data is for use only for COVID-19 related research or comparative studies defined in the data use request. And this is explained in the N3C code of conduct. Next slide, please. So to wrap up, if one of the key ideas that the committee wants to emphasize to the community is working with the domain team, it has multiple advantages for authors. One, it avoids slowing down the publication workflow for the authors because of pitfalls along the process. The second is because the domain team is made up of people who are familiar with the policies in the enclave. There is a chance that the compliance issues, compliance with the policies, are less. And we welcome any authors who would like to learn more and engage more with the policy firsthand to be on the publication committee for a period of 4 weeks or some, as Christine mentioned, we're happy to bring them on board as a temporary internship. The second advantage of working with the domain team is methodological pitfalls that would otherwise be picked up during peer review. For example, the level 2 data set has some information that is that is needed for some analyses, but if we are not aware of that, that the level 2 data set doesn't have the information and that we need a level 3 data set, for example, date shifts. Those are things that come up that the domain teams have people who are informed about issues like that. These pitfalls, it's better to find them early on in the analysis compared with realizing late in the analysis or after the manuscript is prepared. That's another advantage of working with people in the domain teams. And third is the domain teams have people with complementary expertise that can strengthen the scientific quality of any product. The list of the domain teams is at the link in the below at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. These are links, and these links and the slides will be available to people, to the community. These are the links to the documents that guide the work of the publication committee. I think that ends our presentation. Could you go to the next slide? Yeah, it's time for questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thanks. That was an incredibly comprehensive description of a very ambitious and complex process. So are there other questions? I have a few of my own, but start out with other folks. Let's see, no open questions, anything in the chat?
There was one question from Sharon, and it was any guidance around domain teams' involvement and how to acknowledge the domain teams in publication as an author. The Swaroop just touched on that. If there's any more to add to this.
We haven't seen, I think, like a specific domain team mentioned in the author byline, if that's what you're talking about. I guess that could happen, but we, as a publication committee, we tell the authors, who should be offered consortial authorship, so that tier 2 authorship, and then it would go out to those relevant domain teams, and then individuals from those domain teams who who fill out the contributors form indicating that they want to be a tier 2 author, then they would be indexed on Medline for that paper.
Can I just chime in and say, so the domain teams can be involved at varying levels. One is, directly in the analysis or the preparation of the manuscript, but also in the development of domain-specific artifacts, code sets, and value sets that would be potentially repurposed in a third-party manuscript. In both of those situations, consortial authorship would be appropriate.
So, question about how the attribution process has gone. I mean, so I know that at least from some examples, getting journals to actually list consortial authors in Medline I think was not always that simple. Is that maybe somebody could talk about experiences in the last while on that topic?
Sure. I'm probably the sacrificial lamb in this situation. I've had to follow up with journals over the course of many months in the case of the marker paper. But it's been my experience that they eventually do index them, but it can take up to a year to do that. But I do want to emphasize that consortial authorship, while it is not perfect and journals don't necessarily leap with alacrity in indexing the authors, it is still our best tool for providing credit to folks who otherwise are under acknowledged and under appreciated.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I've always viewed that it's really one of the, and I don't know if it's innovative because it's certainly not. I mean, TCGA did that sort of thing, but certainly a consortium of this size and complexity doing this is very, very impressive. So I just wonder, but it's a tough job getting this to happen.
Yeah.
Another question about cell sizes. And this is sort of directed at Swaroop because you were talking about it. So the issue of sort of derived cell size or logical, imputation, I mean, it's actually an interesting question. And presumably, since the cell size thing is, I guess, more of a moral rather than a legal requirement, if you miss something, you do your best. But maybe, it certainly human inspection of a paper will almost certainly not reliably lead to identifying all cases where a cell size could be inferred. So, what are your thoughts? Or maybe I'm wrong. What are your thoughts about this?
I'm curious to what extent and examples of when human inspection might actually not come through. It's possible that the people who screen for cell sizes, and that screening happens at multiple levels, at the authors, the downloads committee, publication committee. We may miss seeing them, but are there analytical situations where it's not possible to screen it, not possible to obscure them? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm not saying it's not. Obviously, it's possible to obscure them, but it's a little bit more like debugging a code in the sense that if you've got a complicated table and there are a variety of scenarios where several different observations put together could be used to imply another, which would give information that's of less than 20 cell size. What I'm asking is, it seems to me that this is sometimes not going to be caught. I mean, it's not necessary. I mean, I don't think it's the end of the world that it's not caught, but it's an interesting, at least to me, issue, doing this sort of thing manually. It's like grammar checking a code or trying to compile a code by hand or whatever it is. I mean, it's a process that has a lot of details that people are going to sometimes miss. I'm just wondering whether you guys had discussed this or been concerned about it, or somehow automating it seems kind of overkill for this one consortium, but it does seem like a conceptually automatable thing.
Yes, there are examples where the tables were complex and it wasn't evident that cells can be back calculated. And there are examples where the committee members were not confident that their back calculation was accurate, and we reached out to the authors and the authors clarified for us. Automation is an interesting thought. It could be done. In the enclave, and where it's a tool that people who run an analysis create a table. They run it through a script, a common script, and the script checks for it. But the structure of tables is very diverse. Sometimes we have to add across columns, sometimes we have to add across rows. And like you said, sometimes information across columns might inform some totals across rows or cells in rows. That's, I think I'm thinking of the coding task of writing such a script, and it's going to be somewhat tricky without standardization of how the tables are presented.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting it for this consortium. I mean, I think it's it may be an interesting master's or PhD thesis for somebody in some context, but I think it's harder than it seems. Maybe it doesn't seem that easy.
And I guess we view it as really an extremely important part of our job on the committee, I would say, is to find every possible reference to a cell size less than 20, or in the text, reference to the number of individuals less than 20. So I know you were saying it might not be super important, but I would say on the committee, we view it as very important. And then, just like there's team science in making the tables and doing the analyses, there's team science on the publication committee, and sometimes everyone will miss something and just one person catches that small.
Oh, no, and don't get me wrong. I didn't say it wasn't important.
Yeah.
What I said is that it's likely some things slip through the cracks.
Joel,
Right.
sorry.
Right, you go.
Yeah, hey Joel, this is Ken. You're totally right. We did look into automating it, and it didn't really feel like the juice was worth the squeeze. That it would be just so hard to even for it to automate it. So, and I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But the process is in CAT's reviews it. Then we have the download committee, which is Chris and Melissa review it, and then the publication group reviews it. So what you're saying is accurate, but I think we've caught most of them. You know what I'm saying? But
right, and probably the ones that are important. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so for instance, if cell size of sodium is mistakenly, anyway, I don't want to beat this to death. I was just sort of curious because it seemed like a potentially interesting problem if you sort of once in the mood to nerd out about such things.
And I do think what we also did, Joel, is that all of us, the cell size limitation is 10, and we took a very conservative approach and doubled that obviously to 20. There's no science behind that other than finger in the wind to some degree, but I think that I think it's worked pretty well, and so, but I hear what you're saying. It's a really hard one. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So any other questions, thoughts? Let me ask a sort of big picture question, because I mean, I've been incredibly impressed by this process since really the beginning of N3C. What do you see as being, your biggest accomplishments and the biggest, unmet challenges so far? Just directed at any of you guys.
So Joel, I guess my question, are you asking the publication?
Yeah. I mean, because this is a huge effort and tremendous amount of volunteer effort that goes into this.
Well, I would say the backbone of the publications committee is Julie and Christine and Torsenai. They really keep all of the many moving parts moving and in the right order and tracked, and it's really impressive the Google skills that they have to keep this huge undertaking organized. So I can't point to any one thing other than that. It's been a huge amount of work, mostly done by them, and it's very impressive how well it's organized.
And I would say, Joel, that it's a testament to the committee that many of the members of the committee have been committee member for 2 years or more. that, clearly people are dedicated to the process and take that their role very, responsibly. And that is an accomplishment. When you have volunteers who dedicate their time to review those publications, weeks in and weeks out, I think that's a big accomplishment. Challenge is to continue to educate author. I think that obviously they are getting to the committee pretty late in the process, and having them really involved earlier would be probably easier for them, working with the domain team, really understand all those roles. I think for us, it's the biggest challenge.
Great.
Joel,
Okay.
can I comment on this?
Sam, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I just want to echo what, I mean, this to me is just an amazing accomplishment, and from the volunteer of time. So I just want to say incredibly thankful. And obviously to echo what Carolyn said, we're always amazed at Julie's mastery of Google. And the amazing thing is, all Julie asked for is more Google, which we at NCATS try to give her as much Google as she wants, but also I just was going to say, I was surprised, a little bit surprised during this presentation that you guys didn't show some of the metrics, because I just think they're amazing. I think with an H index of 22, over 1,700 citations. I mean, it's just phenomenal what the community obviously has put out using N3C, but also what this committee has done. So I just really want to give a huge, word of thanks for everybody, and just cannot express the gratitude more for what you guys have done to just keep this rolling, really, for lack of a better term. Really phenomenal work to everybody on this committee. So thank you all.
Well, thank
Really,
you, Sam.
it really is a team effort. I just want to give a shout out to my teammates here, and also to everybody who is willing to kind of go through the process, because it does require effort from authors, and we recognize that, and we try to do the turnaround as swiftly as possible. Abstracts were getting approved within sometimes as little as 15 minutes. That's not a promise that we'll do it in 15 minutes, but it just means we're on top of it, and we know that it's effort on the authors that we want to minimize. And then also I want to mention that the attribution and publication policy was just updated in Zenodo, and we will, when we send out the links to the presentation, we'll also link to that. But the actual updates in that, do we have time for me to just list what the updates to that policy are?
Sure, we got 5 minutes.
Great. So we've got that abstracts, posters, and podium presentations need to be submitted before they go to the conference to be submitted. We also updated encouragement to work with the domain teams. We included a requirement that the manuscript ID be present in the body of the work. And the reason for that is that tracking these over time into their final published version is very taxing. So we're hoping that that will help and also encourage compliance. Also, data and code availability statement will be strongly encouraged, and the attribution of code sets and value sets is also included. And then I also want to make a shout out for the author arranger tool from the NIH. A lot of our papers have in excess of 20 authors. And when you start dealing with that, it's helpful to have a tool to help with the, affiliations and all of that jazz. So check that out if you haven't already. And then finally, clarifying language about the use of data from Alaska Native and American Indian individuals. So that's coming your way. Look out for it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, and
There's
thank
a
you.
quick
for-
question, sorry, Joel,
Okay,
in the
go
chat.
ahead.
I'm going to share my screen, and it's a question for Swaroop. I think it's a follow-up, Swaroop. It's a question from Emily Hadley. I'm going to read it out. Following up on Swaroop's mention on the hypothetical examples with renal group wanting to study a long COVID, what would be the appropriate ways that team to proceed?
I expect that the authors would apply for a different data use request that's focused on long COVID. Christine, is there anything more or different that authors would do there?
Yeah, so the data use request needs to align with the topic. And also, when developing a methods paper, to apply it to COVID. So at least do some really initial analysis where those methods are applied to COVID, not just presenting a methods paper.
Thank you for the question, Emily. I didn't think of saying that, giving that information when I was speaking.
One more question, my apologies. I'm just gonna read that one out from Imelda. It says, do you need to be funded to access this data?
No.
All right.
The data is free to you after you do the requirements for accessing the data. As long as you have the time to access it, you can access the data at no cost.
Great. All right. Well, I think we're at time, and thanks for the excellent presentation and all of your incredible work on your committee, and thanks everybody for coming. And see you next time. Bye-bye.